The name's Bond. James Bond.
The screenwriters of tonight's film, whose credits also include Let Him Have It, Plunkett and McLean, Johnny English, SSDB, as well as the Bond films The World Is Not Enough, Die Another Day, Casino Royale, Quantum of Solace, Skyfall, Spectre, and No Time to Die. We are thrilled to welcome to the Electric Palace Neal, Purvis, and Robert Wagner. And now, welcome gentlemen, now also a composer whose film CV includes Stargate, Independence Day, Godzilla, Zoolander 2, Too Fast, Too Furious, Hot Fuzz, Made in Dagenham, The Chronicles of Narnia. He was musical director for the opening ceremony of the 2012 Olympics. And Tomorrow Never Dies, The World's Not Enough, Die Another Day, Casino Royale, and Quantum of Solace. Please welcome Mr. David Arnold.
I applauded you from the back, don't worry.
Gentlemen, welcome. Thank you so much for being here for our gala evening. It's very rare to have a panel with screenwriters and a composer, guys who actually know each other and get on. It's like, sorry, know each other, says you.
Well, I don't think it ever happened. Well, obviously it has now, so that's ruined that story. But no, it doesn't usually. And the thing that is most terrifying is that it's 20 years old. That's the thing that frightens me the most. That it really does seem like yesterday. And I know old people say that. It feels like, but it really does. It feels still very recent to me. So I was always 20 years old now, Casino Royale, and I was thinking, God, how old was I 20 years ago? Obviously, 20 years younger. But I was like, God, that's like, it seems young now, and the age I am now, and when I was that age, I think, God, that's old. And you see like old people going, I'm one of them now. I'm an old person. But anyway, it's nice to be anywhere at this age.
So we've got a lot of questions. People have also sent in questions, which I'll pepper through the session for us here. Let's talk about the film we're here to see tonight, and to our esteemed writers. How talk us through? So you started work on Casino Royale before Daniel Craig was cast. Can you tell us about the genesis, what happened, why it was chosen, and the work you did before he came on board?
Well, I think we'd done a spin-off from Die Another Day called Jinx, which Halle Berry was going to be in. And that had kind of come to an end because MGM were being sold again, and they didn't want to spend any money. And so we were having lunch with Michael Wilson in Los Angeles, and he said, I think you should look at Casino Royale again. And, this was kind of really shocking to us. I mean, it's because they had the rights to it, and they'd never had the rights to it before. But for us, you say about 20 years, the fact that the Bond films had been going 40 years or something, and we were going to get a chance to actually do a Fleming book, and the first one was just incredible. But it meant that we could start with whoever the new Bond would be right at the beginning. And so, Rob, you went and got some cigars, didn't you?
Yeah, I thought that was appropriate. We were staying in a quite nice hotel in Santa Monica, and we sat on our respective balconies and reread the book. We've both read it, as a natural part of growing up in this country at that time. And so it was wonderful to have this book that had never been properly adapted, and is the sort of core of the story of James Bond. But in fact, it would make a fairly good radio play, I'd say, in terms of in terms of what the cinematic Bond had become, it doesn't really deliver. It's all set in basically a small resort in northern France, and it has action in it, but like action, some of it is like a guy trying to make his chair fall over and things like that. And
It's true, actually.
so what we had to do was sort of try to capture the spirit of the book, but make it feel like a Bond that would fit in the tradition that they had Cubby Broccoli and Harry Saltzman had created. So that, and also, it's very much a Cold War book. And so how do you make it contemporary? Because actually at that time the Cold War wasn't on. It's back on again now. But so those are the challenges. But and that was also the fun thing to be doing.
And David, you had already been working on Bond films, and you come to it by your incredible Shaken Not Stirred album, I believe. When you came to work on Casino Royale, what were the changes that you wanted to make?
Well, I suppose the previous three that I'd done, Pierce Brosnan films, and there'd been a considerable gap between Die Another Day and Casino Royale. It was like 5 years. And 5 years in a sort of weird limbo without really knowing what was really going to be happening. And writing for Pierce's James Bond meant that you become sort of intimate with the way that he portrays the role, the way he moves, his reactions. So you feel like you're kind of writing for his version of it. And when I got the first, I think it was the first draft of the script that the boys had done, I was reading this not knowing who James Bond was going to look like or how he was going to move and how he was going to act. So you could really start thinking about the character devoid of any of the baggage of a performance in a way, which it was really interesting. And I remember sitting at an old upright piano, thinking that in a way I have to write something which is the progenitor of the James Bond thing. Like, what would be the thing that came before the James Bond thing? Because we can't lead with that, because he's not James Bond in this film yet. He has to earn that as he goes along. So the idea of that song, which was You Know My Name, I had the title, and that was inspired by a line in the play, in the screenplay, to do with the arrogance of Daniel's Bond in this instance. That he's not subtle, he doesn't learn that aspect of himself yet. And I had the opening kind of that, which was kind of like the Bond, but instead of going to a sort of boring musical, instead of going to sort of it stayed in the minor key, it goes to the major key on the third turn of the note. So anyway, that was the kind of, so I had that, and I thought, well, that's the start. And I thought I wanted to call it You Know My Name, because someone in the films, they always say like, oh, and you are, and who are you? And he'll say, oh, my name's Bond, James Bond. Right? And I liked it, but he says, he would say, you know my name, you know who I am. In fact, actually, one of my favourite stories, actually, I was doing a radio show with Bob Morton. Bob Morton said, he goes, oh, if I was James Bond, he goes, this is how I would do the line. He goes, my name's James Bond. James Bond. It should have been my favourite reading already. Anyway, so then I waited until they were started to shoot, and I went to Prague, and Chris Cornell was in Prague, and we then saw footage, saw how then Daniel was moving and what he was doing. And over the next 2 or 3 weeks, started the song. And I always think the song is kind of like the spine of it for me. Everything for a Bond movie should come from that, you know, and every time that happens or there are elements of it, you feel anchored in the world that the song has created. So for me, it's always song first, score from that.
Great. And in terms of the script, one of the big things with Bond movies is the way you're linking character and action, and the action sequences being so defining of the Bond movies. You guys talk about how you construct an action sequence, like how when you're starting to write it, starting to imagine it. What are the unique challenges? How have you approached it?
Well, the idea for the free running chase at the beginning came from my wife had produced a commercial that was for a sports shoe, and it had this Navajo construction engineer running around a building that hadn't been finished, you know, really dangerously running. I mean, this is before health and safety and everything, running across these girders and jumping. And I remember that it had to be re-edited because it was considered too scary for people, and for the cinema kind. And so we had that we'd always kind of logged. And then there was the we'd seen about this new parkour free running that was coming out of Paris, and so we took that a documentary on that and this advert and into the Bond office and showed the producers, and they liked it. And so then we started working on our own version of how this action would work. And so we do our version, which is like a couple of pages of detailed action. And then the stunt people start working it up, and it just gets better and better and more extreme, and so much better than we wrote.
But the actual
Character side of it.
the character side of it is that hitherto in James Bond movies, he's always the best. He's better than everyone else. And what we were doing was the guy that he's against is better than him. And Bond is tenacious and never gives up. He keeps getting knocked down, he gets up and he keeps going. But he's not as good as this guy, and he's reckless, and it's none of the things that you've seen James Bond be in the previous movies, and also you've never seen him run so much, just at a basic level. So it was
Gadgets and
no gadgets and no quips really, and so the idea was this guy is raw and unfinished and messy, but he's kind of good, you know, and that then Daniel got cast, and that was absolutely perfect. And the muscularity of what you did, where you used the majors, not the minors, was it all came together, I thought.
Well, the choice of Chris Cornell was because I was looking at the first time I saw that sequence, it was 17 and a half minutes long. I think it came out to 11 in the end of the movie, but it was still, you know, a very long sequence. But we hadn't decided on a singer at that point, and they were still shooting the movie, and I saw some assemblies of this thing. And there is a moment where Daniel Craig's James Bond runs through a wall. And I was thinking, who sounds like that looks? You know, who is it who, if you heard him sing, could be not only that person, but later in the scene, has anyone not seen it? I don't want to spoil it. But later on, there's a scene with Vesper in the shower after something terrible has happened, and he's sort of comforting her. I got an excellent note from Barbara Broccoli about that as a piece of music. But in terms of the singer, it's like you've got to be able to be that person as well as the one who's running through a wall. And I was thinking, who in contemporary world of male vocalists is that? And there really isn't that many people. There are a lot of, you know, sort of slightly tiny, smaller, Paul Me kind of, you know, acoustic, which is fine.
Thinking of,
but there's not anyone who's really got to do that, you know. And Chris for me was the only one. But Barbara, in that moment with Bond and Vesper, I had a slightly darker piece of music for that moment, and I think it's the only note I got from Barbara out of the whole score, which was amazing. But it was a really, really important one, which was in that moment when he takes her hand and sits with her in the shower and turns it on, is the start of their love affair. And that love affair is the most defining one of his entire life, I think, and informed everything else about his tenure as Bond, for the next 5 movies. And so that delicate, exposed thing for her turns into something rich for them both. But that was because of a great note by Barbara, who was the sort of beating heart of a lot of it, I think.
Yeah, that's great. So we've got a question from Matt Boyd, who lives here at Bridport and is one of our cinema gurus at Bridport. In my 20s, he says, I was lucky enough to be briefly involved in the shoot for Casino Royale. I did some dailies on location in a very junior role. At a test match between Pakistan and England. I think it was filmed at an English public school near Pinewood. It was set in Lahore, and my memory is that Daniel Craig was being chased around the stands by a very athletic agent. The scene was cut from the film. My question is, he says, do I remember this correctly? And why was it cut?
Well, it's interesting to us because we had nothing to do with that. We had written something that
what we'd written was this black and white thing of killing a guy in a tiled place. But we didn't think that you should see James Bond in a public toilet. And so we set it in the
Lizard House.
Yeah, the Lizard House in the zoo in
New York.
Yeah, in Manhattan, and so which fitted in with some Ian Fleming stuff. So that's what we wrote, and then I think after we got fired off the movie, Martin Campbell wanted to put a cricket scene in. So they filmed a whole couple of days at Eton, which would have been very expensive. And it all ended up on their cutting room floor because it's about the pacing of things. And it's only in the, okay, you've got the coverage and it's very exotic, I suppose, to have a cricket match in a way. But
I have seen, I think it's a DVD extra, and you really don't miss it. Go and round.
But he's not having an episode there. He really
Good to know, Matt. There we go. David, you've talked about, and you were speaking to us earlier in this brilliant Maker session that you did earlier at the town hall for us, about how Bond has to earn his theme across the film. Just talk a little bit about that here for people who are going to want to see it in a second. And what
apologies to anyone who was there earlier, but it felt like there was some pressure from Sony, who were slightly nervous about us making a Bond movie without the Bond theme in it, and they were worried that people would be able to relate to it in the same way. I trusted an audience that they would, but in order to kind of placate and to ease the way into it, I figured, instead of having nothing of the Bond theme, and to a certain extent, I think My Name feels like it, and certainly the rest of the music that I wrote for the film feels like Bond music. It's just that they didn't have the theme. So I figured, in the process of this movie, Bond earns his stripes as 007, and he doesn't really earn them completely until the last frame of the movie when he says the line. So I thought, how about if, when he does something which we associate with Bond, in the iconography of it, he wins his Aston Martin in a game of cards, and when he gets the keys thrown to him, it's like you hear a little bit of the Bond theme. It's like, okay, I've got that. That's one stripe. And then when he gets off a plane, his first kind of venture abroad, as a 00 agent, he gets off the plane in exotic location. He earns a little bit more of it then. When Vesper buys him a dinner jacket, and the first time we see him putting on a dinner jacket and trying it on in the mirror, and he's seeing himself in the DJ for the first time, and for us, this is the first time we've seen James Bond in a DJ as well. And he's checking himself, and it's like all of a sudden it's like, oh, there's something else cements there, and he has a little bit more, and it's only right at the very end after Mr. White, again spoilers, he gets shot and he crawls on and he looks up and says, "Who are you?" Daniel looks down with his massive gun on his shoulder and it says the name's Bond, James Bond, and then we kind of scrooge into the Bond thing for the first time. And so he's earned it fully by then, and I think we have as an audience, and it was super exciting. And just a quick note about that piece of music and that recording of that piece of music. I saved that until the very last thing we recorded in the score. So there's like over 100 minutes of music, I think, and we'd recorded for about 5 or 6 days, and we hadn't done the Bond theme, so the orchestra was as eager to play it as we were to hear it, and so we put the music out, and everyone knew it was the last thing we recorded. So the director was there, and Barbara and Mike were there, and everyone was there. And I was there. He was there, and I was sitting there with a big fat Gibson guitar ready to twang, and the version that you hear in the film is the read-through rehearsal, first time anyone had seen it, run that we did. Everyone sat up about an extra inch when they knew it was the Bond theme. And I think something about British musicians and their ownership of that music and their needs to make that special. Everyone sat forward a little bit more, and as soon as we started, it clicked in. It's like the whole thing exploded. And because everyone was playing together, we didn't do it in sections. The whole orchestra played together and everyone could hear what everyone else was doing. And that thing happened. That thing happened that can only happen when people do things together. It's a bit like if you're in the theatre and there is a play, and sometimes this exchange happens and there's an energy that happens between audience and performer where one thing feeds another and it just gets better and better. And so we did this one take, and they hadn't seen the dots before. And it just sounded, I mean, I remember looking at everyone going, "Oh, this is just electric." I don't know what you thought. I mean, it was just astonishing. And we said, well, we better do it again, for safety. And immediately just ran it again, and it was like, it was good, but it wasn't that one. So that one that you hear in the film was the first time anyone had seen it and played it, which is a testament to the standard of our musicians as well. But also says something about the legacy of that theme, and that music. I think there's something that everyone is very proud of in order to, and that became the theme then that they used in all the Daniel's films, which was quite nice. Yeah, it was.
We'd been working on the treatment and the script without it ending like that for a while, and it was only quite late we came up with this thing, which our first stab at it was that he pulls up at a Swiss border in the Aston Martin, and an attractive border guard, female, asks for his passport and what his name is, and he says James Bond, and roars off. I mean, takes his passport back. And
I've got that concert. It's one of the few things that I nicked.
But the thing is that it was that moment that we realised that that's what the script was about, and that's what the film was about. We were kind of doing the book, but this was that he is becoming the cinematic James Bond. And that's why you have to have the music, because that's all part of it.
Yeah.
And it meant we were now aiming for something, and as you say about the music, you could then dip in all these bits that.
But it was in the script. Yeah, it was the last thing. Yeah, it's the last line of the script was "We hear the James Bond theme," and even seeing that written down in words gives you the, it's like, oh my God, I'm so ready for this to happen. But it was written down, so I mean, I can't claim it was my idea at all.
I mean, it's just, it's happy.
If they were, I would, but.
So the three of you worked on a number of Bond films. The invidious question is, which is your favourite of the ones you worked on?
The three. Yeah, been the three that we worked on.
Yeah. Of the ones you worked on, which do you love the most?
It would have to be this film. Yeah.
And
Without a
why?
doubt. Because it was the launching of this whole Daniel Craig era, and it was an opportunity for it all to be new again, but different. You know, the same again, but different is what you know. But it was just exciting, and I left the cinema when I went to see it feeling, you know, fantastic because the way it ended, and you could follow him. You know, you liked it.
And I would say that I just think everything came together brilliantly. You know, David's score is incredible. Dan, I mean, it's extraordinary because they started shooting. When they were in Prague. They still haven't cast Vesper Ava Green, and if it's unthinkable. That movie without her is unthinkable because it's all about that relationship that works so well. I mean, and that's the actors, but the casting. Mads Mikkelsen hadn't been cast when they were, you know, so you these things without him. I thought he was excellent, and I'd never seen him in anything before. And there's this guy, he's very good at beating Bond's balls.
Literature.
I mean, I think Martin did do some private casting with him before.
There was some great discussions we had about that scene where we were going to have no music, but I remember the censors telling us in the dub we had to turn down the sound of the thwack because it was too upsetting. Well, the fact that he was doing it at all, that's fine. And if it gets too loud,
But so my vote is definitely. I think Casino Royale. I mean, I'm a bit biased, but I think it's a fantastic movie. As a movie, not just as a James Bond film, in my view.
yeah, I think it's as a complete thing. I have got a lot of love for Tomorrow Never Dies because it was my first one, and there's a lot of enthusiasm and energy to it. But this felt like this was my fourth one. It felt like I was less tied to the past, and that it felt like we were putting a kind of line in the sand about the future, you know, and it's like it was really freeing in a lot of ways. And again, for the genesis of that music to happen without knowing who was playing any of the parts, so all you have is the material and your idea of who James Bond is. So no matter what people tell you, you can put 1,000 people in a room and they'll all have slightly different ideas about James Bond, who he is, what the music should be, what the song should be, what it shouldn't be. Everyone's got ideas, you know, and like this was the first time when no one could really say other than us, I suppose, you know. So you felt like it was a big responsibility, but at the same time, I think if you understand the character and I think you have an affinity with it and a way of getting that on paper, then you will be creating the next 15 years of James Bond. That's not what you think when you're doing it, but I think now thinking backwards, it felt much freer in a way because it was as if none of the rest had happened. You know, it really was like nothing else had happened before. We know it had. In the back of our minds, we are still looking at, you know, 50 years.
It's interesting because when we were set out on that, the term reboot was just something to do with computers. No, we didn't even know that we were doing a reboot. No one used that language. And then it becomes now it's a thing, it's a reboot. And retrospectively, or quite quickly, it was obvious that that's what was happening. But we didn't actually think in those terms. But it's interesting that it then began as a story that carried on. And that wasn't a super plan. I mean, we did say to Barbara and Michael, we want to write the next one and start writing it immediately because the story's not over. Well, I'm not going to do any spoilers. But the story's not over. It's only there's stuff to resolve here, and then that ended up being it was a lot of stuff needed resolving over time. So, but I think it's a standalone movie and it's brilliant.
Agreed. Listen, look, gentlemen, we could talk all night. I would like to do another 2 hours of this.
It's one of my favourite phrases. I could listen to these two talk all night, and for a minute there, I thought I was going to have to.
Thank you for Casino Royale. Happy 20th anniversary. Thank you for coming to Bridport for From Page to Screen and our big bomb tonight. And please give it up for Neal, Purvis, Robert,